Welcome back to the Crime Files. I'm John Schachnovsky, retired FBI agent and former legal attaché from Bangkok, Thailand. So I recently returned from a trip to Turkey, Istanbul, Turkey. And while I was on the ground there were two huge tragedies that happened. There were two school shootings that happened in different cities in Turkey over the course of 48 hours. As a former FBI special agent, my mind immediately went to the active shooter protocols that we developed when I was in the FBI. And whenever I see a school shooting or these kind of things, I always think back to active shooter drills that we did. Now in Turkey, active shooter incidents are very, very rare, extremely rare from people I spoke to there. So when I was filming on the streets of Istanbul and watching the newscast there, you could see that there was the shock of these shootings that happen more often in the US, but they happen very infrequently in Turkey. So for me, it's a reminder of this soft target situation, be it a school or be it a nightclub or social venue. These remain some of the biggest challenges we have. A soft target, not much security, and they are fighting between keeping things open and relevant for customers and security. So today we're looking at an event that happened in 2017, the Reina nightclub massacre, which also was a soft target. And I went to the site of the Reina nightclub today, and I wanted to see what kind of tactical nightmare it was and discuss with you what happened, the arrest, and all of those things. Let's go to the Bosphorus. I'm currently in the Ortaköy neighborhood of Istanbul, Turkey. Behind this number 44 door used to stand the Reina nightclub. Since the shooting, it never opened again. Since then, the Turkish government has torn down the building. But on January 1st, 2017, this is the site of one of the largest active shooter cases in the history of Turkey, and what turned into be one of the largest manhunts this country's ever seen. From an investigative standpoint, I want you to see the location we're at right now. In front of the club, you have a main thoroughfare where cars are driving. You would have had people being dropped off, people parking, and people coming on foot via public transportation or just walking to the venue. Behind, you have the Bosphorus Strait. Now, this waterfront venue is very important. At about 1:15 a.m., the shooter walked down the street using flashbangs and entered the club, firing indiscriminately. But what have happened is usually you have an escape route in the back of the sides. At this club, you had the back. What that means is many, many victims jumped into the cold waters of the Bosphorus behind me and began to float down with the current. What happened with that craziness inside the club is it allowed the shooter to change clothes and exit with the fleeing individuals from the club. And then the 17-day manhunt began. So the shooter walked away. But the manhunt that followed was a master class, I can tell you, in coordination. The capture of the shooter, whose name was Abdulkadir Masharipov, was a massive forensic and intelligence success for the Istanbul police and the Istanbul and Turkish intelligence services. It wasn't just a lucky break that happened sometimes. This was actually a 17-day manhunt grind that involved tracking a highly disciplined cell network and a mass amount of CCTV cameras. So from an FBI investigative perspective, here is exactly how they tracked him and how the arrest went down. As I said before in recent videos, I'm not going to cover the shooting as much. I'm going to cover the investigation after the incident. So Masharipov was pretty close to being caught within minutes of the attack. When he fled the Reina, he discarded his jacket containing remaining flashbangs that he used in the attack. He blended into the crowd with the people fleeing the scene, and police SWAT teams arriving on the scene actually stopped him. But they believed he was panicked. He was a panicked victim escaping the scene, which makes sense. They handed him over to another group of officers to be ushered toward the sidewalk area. And then what happened was Masharipov was able to use that confusion to hop into a taxi and vanish into the Istanbul night. So how did they track him after that? Once he vanished, what happened next? Well, the digital and physical breadcrumbs were key. From what we understand, what I read and interviews I did, investigators looked at over 2,000 hours of CCTV footage. They tracked the taxi he took back from the nightclub, and they worked backwards, not from leaving the nightclub, but going to it before the attack. They identified the safe houses he used before the attack in two separate neighborhoods of Istanbul. Police realized that he was part of a larger Central Asian ISIS terrorism cell. They conducted, based on these two identified areas, they conducted raids on 58 different locations and detained over 50 suspects, many from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and China's from the Uyghur region. A cigarette butt that was discarded in one of these safe houses was tied to and matched with a fingerprint on the rifle that Mayor Shipov left at the Reina, which confirmed his identity. They eventually intercepted communications from an ISIS leader in Raqqa, Syria, who was providing logistical and financial support to the shooter and the individuals who were part of his cell and those who, after the shooting, were assisting in protecting and hiding him. On January 16th, 16 days after the attack in 2017, the final raid took place. It was in the suburb of Istanbul's European side, the same side that the Reina was on. And around midnight, a group of anti-terrorism police raided the apartment. They found and arrested Mayor Shipov, who was found hiding under a bed. They also arrested on the scene an Iraqi man and 3 women from Senegal, Somalia, and Egypt, who were all allegedly acting as support for the cell and assisting in Mayor Shipov's escape. In the apartment, police also found $197,000 US dollars in cash, 2 drones, and several SIM cards. Now, the cash is a huge detail. It proves that this wasn't just a lone wolf, but a well-funded operation. When he was pulled out of the apartment, photos showed him with Mayor Shipov with bruises to his face and the look of someone who's been on the run for 17 days, this look of total defeat. According to the Istanbul governor, who was interviewed soon after, his first words to the police, first words he said were a confession. He said, "I did it." He just wanted to be over and just said, "I did it." He later told investigators and interrogators that he was originally ordered to attack Taksim Square, a huge tourist area in Istanbul. But they changed the target to the Reina at the last minute because the security at Taksim Square was too high. And being there last week, I can tell you, the security at Taksim Square is always high. For me, looking at this case, what's striking and what ties back to the school shootings I mentioned at the start of the video is the profile of the shooter. Whether it's the Reina shooter or one of the 14-year-old shooters from the school shootings, these individuals often leave a digital or a behavioral trail. For the Reina shooter, it would have been the cell phone information, the text messaging, the fingerprint, the CCTV videos. In the school shooters and others, it's often psychological red flags. The way they acted, the way people always say that I saw him acting strangely, or the bullying or what have you in school shooters. So the Reina shooter, Mayor Shipov, eventually was found guilty and got 40 life sentences for his crime. The justice was absolute. The absolute maximum they could have given, he got. And as I told you before, the scars are going to stay forever because the nightclub shut down and never reopened. So being in Turkey for me during the recent school shootings was a pretty sobering experience. I was there to film about the Reina nightclub, and these school shootings happened while I was there. But this shows why we do this, why we analyze these cases. It isn't just for the true crime story, the glamorizing true crime stories. It helps us understand the why and the how, so we, FBI agents, can better protect our communities and police officers and everybody else. My thoughts now are with the families of the school shooting victims. And obviously my thoughts before this would have been with the nightclub survivors and the victims' families. But now the school shootings has me thinking about that as well. The aftermath of these scenes, I've seen the aftermath firsthand when I was in the Bureau. I know the recovery is not measured in years. It's not measured in days, it's measured in years and decades. I'm John Schachnovsky. Thanks for joining me on the Crime Files. See you next time.